More than 200 years ago, on a cold autumn morning, a cart carried the most hated woman in France to her death. The crowd screamed for the monster they had been promised, the queen who, when her people had no bread, supposedly laughed and said, "Let them eat cake." She was 37. Her hair had already gone white. She never said those words, and on her hand, as she climbed the steps to the blade, she wore a single ring, engraved with 5 small words, meant for a man she was never allowed to love. This is the secret the world spent 200 years trying to erase. Her name was Marie Antoinette. History remembers a monster of greed and cruelty. History is wrong. The truth is a love story, the kind that gets a woman destroyed. This is how the most hated queen in the world came to carry 5 secret words all the way to her grave. She was 14 years old when they sent her away to be married. She had never met the boy who was to be her husband. She crossed Europe in a painted carriage to a country that had hated hers for as long as anyone could remember. And at the border, they made her give up everything she had brought: her clothes, her servants, even the little dog she had held on her lap the whole way. Nothing of home was allowed to cross with her. She stepped into Versailles with new clothes, a new name, and a husband, the future king of France, who looked at her once and then looked away. He was gentle enough in his shy and awkward way, but he cared far more for his hunting than for his wife, and for years their marriage stayed a marriage only on paper. All around her, the most glittering court in the world bowed and smiled, and the moment her back was turned, it whispered. She was the Austrian, the foreigner. She would always be the foreigner. She had 1,000 people watching her every move, and not one of them was hers. Then, one winter night, she put on a mask and went where a queen was never supposed to go. A public ball, in the city, in a crush of strangers. Behind the mask, for a few hours, no one knew her. She was not the Austrian, not the future queen, not anyone's bargain. She was just a girl in a beautiful crowd. And in that crowd, she saw a young man standing a little apart, tall, dark-eyed, with a quiet, almost sad stillness about him that drew her like a held breath. She walked straight up to him. A queen could never do such a thing. A masked stranger could. "You don't dance," she said. "Are you frightened of the women here? Or just bored by them?" He looked at this bold creature and smiled. "Neither. I was waiting to be surprised." "And are you?" "I think," he said, "I'm about to be." His name was Axel von Fersen, a count from Sweden, far from home, beholden to no one at this court. They talked and they laughed, and for a few stolen minutes, she was simply herself. Then the crowd began to press in, curious about the masked woman, and she slipped the mask from her face. She watched the change land on him, the shock, the recognition, the bow he began a moment too late. By then, she was already gone. But she carried that night with her for the rest of her life, and so did he. Within the year, the old king, her husband's grandfather, died, and the lonely Austrian girl found herself Queen of France. Fersen sailed away again, to other courts and other countries, but she did not forget him. She asked after him. She noticed always when he was not there, and when word came at last that the Swedish count had returned, the night he was to come to her, she sent everyone away early. She told herself it was nothing, a whim. She had asked to see him in his uniform, the blue Swedish coat, and he had agreed. That was all. But she changed the candles twice. She moved a chair and then moved it back. And when the door opened and he stepped in, the dark blue catching the light, the silver bright at his collar, she forgot for a moment to breathe. "Well," he said, holding his arms a little out from his sides. "Will I do?" She didn't answer. She only looked, slowly, openly, the way she was never allowed to look at anyone. It was the most dangerous thing she had done in years. By the next morning, the whole court already had the story. The queen had studied the Swedish count a great deal too long. It was a small thing, a harmless thing, but at Versailles, Nothing whispered ever stayed harmless for long. Still, she could not make herself stop. She had one place that was truly hers, a small palace in the gardens of Versailles called the Petit Trianon, the first thing she had ever owned. There, away from the endless watching, she gathered the few people she trusted, and she made sure Versailles was always one of them. They played cards late into the evenings. One night, losing badly and not caring, she laid down a worse card than she had to, just to keep him at the table a little longer. "You're not even trying," he said. "I'm hopeless at this," she said. "It's practically a state secret." He laughed, a real laugh, not the careful court laugh she heard 100 times a day, and she realized she had spent the whole evening just waiting to hear it. But down the table, someone had gone quiet. A look passed between two of the others. The foreign queen, the foreign count, always together. The same people who had bowed to her that morning were already carrying the story off to whoever would pay to hear it. She knew it, and still, she dealt him in again. On the warm nights, there was music, and there were long walks down to a little marble temple she had built on an island in the water. A temple to love. They would walk there as the light went gold and then blue, and they would talk the way she could with no one else alive. He had never married. There had been women who wanted him. He had chosen none of them. One evening, by the temple on the water, she finally asked him why. "You know why," he said. She did, and that was the whole problem. The music drifted off somewhere behind them. They were alone. His eyes held hers a moment too long, and her hand began to move toward his, and she stopped. She was a wife. She was a mother. She was the Queen of France. She had been a princess, a queen, a mother, but never, in her whole life, simply a woman that someone wanted for herself. And the one time she was the one person on earth forbidden to have it. So she drew her hand back. "We should go in," she said. "They'll be looking for me." "They always are. That's why I have to go." He didn't argue. He only said it quietly, to her back, as she turned away. "No matter where you are, no matter what they make of you, everything leads me to you." She didn't answer. She couldn't. But she carried those 5 words out of the garden, and she kept them for the rest of her life. Maybe that is why, when the chance came, she let him go. He came to tell her himself. He was going to America, to the war, and he would be gone a long time. She had known it was coming. In some small, cowardly corner of herself, she had even wished for it, because an ocean was a wall, and a wall was safer than this. So she smiled and said the right things. A brave thing he was doing, a fine thing. She was glad for him. And then her voice simply stopped working. He saw it. He reached into his coat and brought out something small and warm and squirming. A puppy, no bigger than 2 hands. "So you won't forget me," he said. It was meant as a joke. Neither of them laughed. She held the little dog against her chest and didn't trust herself to speak. She would name him Odin and keep him close for years, the only piece of Versailles she was ever allowed to hold. He bowed. He left. And while he was gone, far across the ocean, he could not see what was happening to her name, because the whispers grew teeth. The little stories about the queen and her Swedish count stopped being passed mouth to mouth and started being printed. Cheap, filthy pamphlets sold on the street, and a hungry country was ready to believe every word. When the war finally gave him back, years later, he came home to a different France, and a queen the country had taught itself to hate. He found her one evening at a window, looking out at a city that had begun to turn against her. "They're printing things now," she said, without turning around. "About you. About us. You should go home, Axel, while you still can." "And leave you to them?" he said. "No." Far below, somewhere in the dark, they could both hear it. a crowd moving through the streets, the way water moves just before a flood. For years, she had pushed him away to keep herself safe. She understood now, too late, that she had really been keeping him safe, and that he was never going to let her. Beyond the gates of Versailles, France was drowning, in debt, in hunger, in rage. And a frightened, furious country went looking for someone to blame. They could not blame the king. Kings were chosen by God. So they blamed the foreigner, the Austrian, the woman who had let a foreign count too close. The pamphlets that had started as whispers became a flood. They said she was bleeding France dry. They said she was a traitor to the country she had married into. And they said, pointing straight at the quiet Swedish count who was always near her, that the queen had betrayed her husband's bed. The one tender, true thing in her life had become a knife in her enemy's hands. They invented 1,000 crimes for her. When a swindler used her name to steal a fortune in diamonds, it did not matter that she was innocent, that she had refused that very necklace, that she had never even known of the scheme. The story people wanted was the queen dripping in diamonds while the poor went hungry. And when they needed her cruelty boiled down to a single sentence, they handed her one she had never said: "Let them eat cake." Old words written about another woman before she was even born. But it was the perfect lie, because it was the lie they already wanted to believe. Piece by piece, the real woman disappeared. In her place, her enemies built a monster. And the monster's deepest sin, the proof of everything, was that she had dared to love. Then the revolution came, and the monster they had built was dragged out to be destroyed. The royal family was torn from Versailles and held in the heart of the city, prisoners in everything but name. The friends who had smiled at her in the bright years melted away, one by one, to save themselves. But not Fersen. When everyone else was running, the Swedish count came back, walked straight into the danger, to her side. "You should go," she told him. "There's nothing left to save here." "Then," he said, "I'll stay for the nothing." She should have sent him away. She couldn't. And so Fersen did the one thing no one else would dare. He decided to steal her out of the country himself. For months, he planned it in secret. The disguises, the false names, a carriage waiting in the dark. One June night, dressed as a common coachman, he came for them. The queen carried her own sleeping children out of the palace with her own hands and placed them into his. And then came the moment that decided everything. The plan only worked one way: 2 small, fast carriages racing for the border by different roads. By morning, they would be free. But 2 carriages meant splitting the family. It meant handing one of her sleeping children to someone else and driving away from them into the dark. She looked at her son and her daughter, and she made the only choice the mother in her could make. "No." "2 carriages," Fersen said, low and urgent. "By morning, we'd be across the border, free." "And leave them?" She pulled her children closer. "I won't." He looked at her, the woman he had loved for half his life, finally close enough to save. And he understood that he was about to lose her, and that there was nothing he could do. Because the thing that would not let her run was the very thing he had always loved her for. So the whole family climbed into one slow, heavy carriage together, and Fersen drove them out into the night. It was too slow. On the road, the king was recognized. In a little town called Varennes, with safety almost within their reach, they were stopped, surrounded, and dragged back to the city in chains. She had chosen her children over her own escape, and that choice, that ordinary, unbearable, motherly choice, is what killed her. Because the rescue, the desperate act of love that was meant to save her, was now handed to her enemies with a brand new name: treason. After that, the 2 of them could no longer meet. Watched day and night, they did the only thing left to them: They wrote. Smuggled, secret letters, carrying everything they could never say aloud while the world burned down around them. And she sealed each one with a ring she had made for this and this alone, a ring engraved with the words he had given her once in a garden a lifetime ago. Everything leads me to you. It was the closest they would ever come, a whole love folded into ink and wax, passed hand to hand in the dark. Once more, he risked his life to reach her. In disguise, he slipped through a side door of the palace where she was now a prisoner and stole a single day at her side. He almost did not know her. In the months since he had last seen her, grief had turned her hair white. She was not yet 40, and she looked like a woman at the end of a long life. He begged her, begged the king, to try one more escape. The king refused, and she would not leave without him. It was the last time the two of them would ever see each other. Neither of them said the word goodbye. After that, the end came quickly. The king was put to death. Overnight, she was no longer a queen, only a widow and a prisoner, stripped even of her name, called only by a number. They took her children from her. They put her on trial for betraying France, and when even that was not monstrous enough, they forced her own small son to accuse her of a crime too vile to repeat. The courtroom went silent. Asked to answer it, the woman they had spent years calling a monster turned to the mothers watching her and said that there are some things no mother should ever be made to defend. For a single heartbeat, the room remembered she was human. It changed nothing. The verdict had been written before the trial began. Guilty. Death. In her last hours, alone in her cell, she did not write to Versailles. She couldn't. It would have destroyed him, and protecting him was the last act of love she had left to give. So instead, by the light of a single candle before dawn, she wrote to her husband's sister. She wrote about her children. She asked that they never seek revenge for her death. And she forgave. Every lie, every cruelty, every hand that had built the monster she was about to die as. In the morning, they cut off her white hair and bound her hands behind her back. They gave her no carriage, only an open cart, so the city could jeer at her one last time as she passed. She rode through all of it with her head held high, and on her hand, as she climbed the steps to the blade, she still wore that one ring, the 5 words pressed against her skin. Everything leads me to you. At the foot of the scaffold, she stepped on the executioner's foot by accident, and out of pure habit, the grace of a whole lifetime that no prison had managed to take from her, she apologized. "Pardon me, sir," she said. "I did not do it on purpose." They were the last words she ever spoke. Far away, the man who loved her was destroyed by the news. He wrote that he had lost everything in this world. And in the years left to him, he did one last, quiet thing for her. He took their letters, the burning, secret words that could still stain her name, and with his own hand, he blacked them out, line after line, burying their love beneath his own ink to keep her safe, even in death. He never recovered. And on the very same day in June that he had once tried to carry her to freedom, a mob dragged him from his carriage and beat him to death in the street. For 200 years, his ink held. The world went on remembering the monster, the cake, the diamonds, the cruelty that never was. And then, in our own time, a new kind of light was turned on those buried letters, and the words he had tried so hard to erase rose slowly back to the surface. They were not the words of a monster. Words like beloved. Words like madly. A queen telling a count that there was not a single moment she did not adore him. He had spent his life trying to bury it, but he could never erase the 5 words she had worn to the scaffold. The same 5 words he had given her, once in a garden, a lifetime ago. Everything leads me to you. For 200 years, the world remembered a monster who never existed. But she was never the lie they built. She was only a woman, a foreigner, a mother, a wife who loved the wrong man in a world that would never allow it. And in the end, they did not destroy her for her cruelty. They destroyed her for her heart.